evening, everybody, and welcome to our New South Wales Small Business Month webinar series on HR Essentials for regionally based small business. My name is Bronwyn Pearson. For those who don't know me, I'm CEO of Pinnacle People Solutions. So I have over 25 years experience providing the full range of HR support and advice to regional employers of all sizes. And it's been a privilege to enhance regional communities by supporting local businesses across the state. So at 5:30 each Wednesday afternoon during the month of October, we have and will continue to be refreshing ourselves on the HR basics. So for the first 2 weeks, we looked at contracts and position descriptions and also record keeping obligations. And today we're addressing the sexy topic of paying your staff correctly. Next week, which will be the final instalment in our Back to Basics series for Small Business Month, we will be talking about policies and procedures and your lawful obligations. So all of these live stream videos will remain on our Facebook page and our website and our YouTube channel, along with an accompanying fact sheet for each one, so you can come back and review them anytime you like. I would encourage you to ask any questions that you might have this evening in the webinar as we go along. I'm just bringing up the chat screen here so that I can make sure that that I get your messages as and when they pop up. And good evening to everybody who has already logged on this evening. Delightful to have you with us. And so please, I'd encourage you to ask any questions you might have as we go along, and I'll do my best to answer. Alternatively, you've got our contact details put up by my wonderful team in the chat screen there if you want to contact us directly and privately. Okay, so as I said, tonight we have the incredibly sexy topic of looking at paying your staff correctly. And look, let's be perfectly honest, it's been in the news a great deal recently. And by recently, I mean at least in the last, 18 months to 2 years, but particularly this year and many times this year. Large organisations such as David Jones, Woolworths, Sydney Uni, and many others have been found to have seriously underpaid their staff, sometimes going back many years. If these businesses with dedicated payroll staff and often quite sizable internal HR departments can get things so wrong, it does beg the question, what hope do small business owners have? So the good news is that with good knowledge and proper systems, it's not difficult to ensure that your staff are being paid correctly. And tonight we're going to go over the key factors that you need to be aware of in order to meet your obligations as an employer. So the first section of tonight's webinar that we are going to talk about is award obligations. And in particular, we'll be looking at pay rates, allowances, penalty rates, shift work, and overtime. So the first thing to have good knowledge of as a small business owner and employer, if you have staff, is what, if any, award or registered agreement covers your staff. So employees of most private businesses are covered by the federal modern awards system, and each award sets out who's covered by that award, the levels and classifications of staff covered under that award, rates of pay for each level and classification, ordinary hours of work, how shift work and overtime function, allowances, any special leave entitlements, and methods for consultation and dispute resolution. So the good news is that you can find the full list of modern awards on the Fair Work website, and we will put the link directly to that in the comments momentarily. So just to put a little bit of context to this, so the modern award system was introduced in 2010. So in 2009 we had what is the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards were introduced, and in 2010 the hundreds of awards that were in place across the country at the federal level were condensed into about 122 modern awards, and the intention there was to cover as many groupings of industries, sectors and types of work as possible. But of course Not everybody employed under the federal system of employment in Australia is covered by a modern award, and I'm going to talk more about that as we go on also. But for the moment, we are talking about award obligations and the circumstances where your staff are covered by an award or a registered agreement. So the questions that you need to ask yourself when you're asking that first question is my employee covered under an award? That's the first question you need to resolve. If they are covered by an award and you determine what that award is, the next question is, what is their classification and their level under that award? And have I assessed that correctly? Now, that might be something that you need a bit of help with, but if you're clear about the duties and responsibilities that this person is required to undertake, and ideally you've got that documented in a position description, which was week one's HR Back to Basics webinar that we did a couple of weeks ago, that you can find up on our website, in Facebook, YouTube, etc. So you need to have determined their classification and their level under the award, and make sure that you've got that correct, because that's going to dictate what their pay and conditions are going to look like. And finally, once you've determined their classification and level under the award and made sure that that assessment you've undertaken is correct, the final question is, what is their base rate of pay according to that classification and level, to their age and their role in your business? For example, are they an apprentice or a trainee, or do they receive piece rates or commissions, as an example? When calculating the pay of your particular staff member under the relevant award, you need to ensure that shift and overtime penalty rates are calculated on each shift individually, rather than on total hours over the pay period. This is often an area we've identified where employers can make mistakes in calculating pay, so please pay close attention to this. And of course, as we're going through this evening, just a reminder that you are very welcome to make contact with us separately, and we can take you through any and all questions and assessments in terms of you paying your staff their correct pay and entitlements. And that first conversation, that first meeting, is completely obligation free. So we'd be very happy to help you with any of these assessments for your staff. So questions to ask yourself then in terms of calculating your staff members' pay under the awards would be, do my employees work within the ordinary hours of the day as stipulated under the award, and ordinary hours of work specified in the award, or do they work shifts that might fall outside of those hours? That's the first question. The second question should be, are their hours being recorded correctly so that the right penalty rates can be applied? So when we talked last week about record keeping, one of the things that we went through for small business owners was the time and attendance records that you're required to keep under the Fair Work Act. And that would mean that you can actually identify hours as having been recorded correctly, so that you can then pay penalty rates, etc., as and when required under the award. And the final question in terms of pay that we would suggest you ask yourself is, do I understand how the penalty rates are to be applied? So by that I mean time and a half for the first 2 hours, double time thereafter, proper public holiday rates, long shifts, etc. And each modern award is different in respect of those things. So if you've got some staff in your organisation that are covered under one award and other staff that are covered under different awards, don't presume that they're all the same terms and conditions, because they're not. Allowances are another area that's easy to misunderstand and not apply correctly. So these include things like laundry allowance for washing uniforms at home, shoe allowance for required footwear, dirty work allowance for particularly messy jobs outside of the normal practice of someone's work, and so on. In respect of allowances then, the questions that you want to ask yourself are you aware of what allowances your staff may be entitled to under the respective award that covers them? And are you calculating those allowances correctly? So, for example, are they to be paid per shift, per week, per hour, per kilometre, etc. And as I said, every award is different. There is a great pay calculator tool available on the Fair Work website called the Pay and Conditions tool, which can give you an indication of whether you are paying your staff correctly, and we will put, again, this link in the comments for you so that you can get to that easily. So what other information helps me pay my staff correctly? First and foremost, accurate timesheets. These are required even for full-time salaried staff, and I talked about this in some detail last week in the webinar on record keeping. So it's incredibly important that you keep accurate timesheets and time and attendance records for all of your staff, including those that are full-time or part-time salaried staff. And also it's important that where you have rosters that you abide by the relevant roster provisions in the modern award. That applies to your staff. So that you can ensure that the calculation of pay for each work period or shift is done correctly, it's essential to keep accurate rosters of when staff are allocated to work and associated accurate timesheets of when they actually did the work, as well as any variations to those rosters and shifts that you might have agreed to in writing with the staff member that might have varied their hours over that roster period. So one of the questions that we most often get asked in terms of employers and calculating pay and entitlements and so forth is, my staff aren't covered by an award, what do I do? The national minimum wage and the National Employment Standards, which sit alongside the Fair Work Act of 2009, that's just been subsequently varied many, many times in that period of time since, apply when an employee is not covered by a modern award. So the default setting is the terms and conditions in the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards. Of course, both of these apply to employees covered by awards as well, but the awards go further than the Fair Work Act and the National Employment Standards to provide provisions that are not included in both those instruments. One of the other questions that we will sometimes get is, my workplace has a registered agreement, what do I do? So registered agreements, often called enterprise agreements or enterprise bargaining agreements, function in much the same way as awards. You need to ensure that you are familiar with the terms of the agreement and ask yourself the same questions as I've already covered in the webinar to this point in time in relation to how to calculate the correct pay for each staff member. Registered agreements have to meet the Better Off Overall test, otherwise known as the BOOT test, and that means that employees covered by the registered agreement must be better off overall than if they were covered by their regular modern award. With ongoing changes in awards, it's important to check that BOOT test regularly against any registered agreements. To any extent to which they might depart from each other, then for example, if the award over time has better conditions than the agreement, then the award prevails. So let's also look at two other important areas that often employers can get spectacularly wrong, and that is superannuation and tax. You are required to withhold income tax from the wages or salary that you pay to your employees and pay that directly yourself to the tax office, and that's now through single touch payroll. From 1 July 2019, all employers should now be using the single touch payroll system to report employee payroll information to the Australian Tax Office, and that includes superannuation. Employers, all of us who employ staff, are obligated and obliged to pay superannuation contributions of 9.5% of an employee's ordinary time earnings if the employee is paid more than $450 gross per month and is 1, over 18, or 2, under 18 and works more than 30 hours a week. So those are the provisions that you must meet in terms of superannuation. Superannuation contributions also apply to full-time, part-time and casual employees and includes temporary residents, and super has to be paid at least every 3 months. Some modern awards and registered agreements also have additional superannuation requirements, so you need to make sure that you're well aware of the provision of the relevant award or awards as they apply to your staff. So I mentioned the term ordinary time earnings. So that's what superannuation is to be calculated on. And ordinary time earnings will include the following: ordinary or normal hours worked, or for casual workers, actual hours worked. Ordinary time earnings also include over-award payments, commissions, shift loadings, annual leave loadings, allowances and bonuses. Ordinary time earnings do not include, however, overtime payments. There is a maximum earnings level that employers need to pay super on. For example, in 2020 to 21, if your employee earns more than $57,090 per quarter, you only need to pay super on that amount and not anything above that. Okay, so often one of the questions we will get asked fairly regularly is, what happens if I do the wrong thing? Getting it wrong can be a very expensive exercise for your business. You will likely need to pay a payroll auditor to comb back through your records to check exactly how much employees have been over or underpaid. For overpayments, you will need to manage the communication with your staff to retrieve that money and do it lawfully. For underpayments, you will need to repay the owed money to employees, whether they're currently employed or not. And don't forget the associated super and tax obligations that would apply to those underpayments. So recently, for example, we have undertaken a number of payroll audits for small business operators across a whole wide range of industries in regional Australia. And what we've actually uncovered is where superannuation, for example, hasn't been calculated correctly on ordinary time earnings. It's only been calculated, for example, on the ordinary hours worked and not the allowances, bonuses, annual leave loading, etc. We've also had payroll audits that have demonstrated that, unfortunately, while the employee might have started being paid the correct award level, classification and rate, that unfortunately the employer hasn't continued to update that on an annual basis and hasn't kept pace with the award changes that have come in. We've also had payroll audits for other organisations that have a registered agreement in place, and where that registered agreement is very old and the award changes over time have superseded some of those entitlements in the registered agreement, to which extent, of course, the award provisions need to prevail. There's been necessarily underpayments and things that have had to be back paid to staff. Okay, so let's have a look then at the practical realities coming out of this rather vexed topic of how do I make sure that I'm paying my staff correctly. You want to ask yourself the questions that I've highlighted throughout the webinar this evening to test your knowledge and understanding of how your employees should be paid. You want to run a test employee or two through the Fair Work Pay Calculator tool, Pay and Conditions Calculator tool that we've given you the link to in the chat screen, to see whether your base assumptions are correct, and then use those numbers to calculate a pay period from scratch to test whether the assumptions and calculation are correct in your payroll software. Finally, if you're not sure what to do, or you're worried that you might have made mistakes in the past, whether intentional or completely innocent but nonetheless need to be determined and rectified, seek professional advice. Businesses who actively rectify mistakes do much better and don't end up in the kind of pickle that we often end up having to support organisations with when they've had a complaint made, for example, to the Fair Work Ombudsman. You're much better to discover that you've made a mistake in terms of payroll or super or tax than if it's found by an external body or indeed one of your current or former staff. So if you have any questions at this point in time, I haven't seen any come up in the chat screen yet, don't hesitate to pop them in there. Otherwise, get in touch with us directly. We'd be more than happy to assist you. And we can assist you, of course, with any payroll questions that you have, interpretation of the any of those 122 modern awards in terms of paying conditions. And we can also undertake payroll audits for you to make sure that you are paying your staff correctly and to identify if there's been any discrepancies, what they are and what the consequences are in terms of back pay or overpayments, for example, and then recouping any said overpayments. So thank you so much for joining us today. We are very appreciative of your attendance in this special Back to Basics series that we're running in October in celebration of Small Business Month. We're delighted to be partnering with the New South Wales Government in this regard and delighted to have you with us for this series and for your attendance this evening. If you've got any particular questions about your business or you would like us to help you out, contact us anytime via email, Facebook, phone, website, etc. And the details are here in the chat screen. Look, today and the last 2 weeks, we've had a lot of people say, oh my goodness, who'd be an employer? The navigation you have to do is so complex, and it is. Look, and awards can be complex and confusing, so please seek advice if you're not sure. It doesn't cost you anything to reach out and have that initial assessment and conversation. So next week's webinar, the final of the 4 that we're running in this month of October for Small Business Month in conjunction with the New South Wales Government, will be the final one in this Back to Basics series, and it will be on policies and procedures, making sure that you understand your lawful obligations. So please join us at 5:30 next Wednesday to ensure that you're getting this part of the picture correct as an employer. And don't forget also that we also have a Monday morning update, COVID update and general HR update every Monday morning at 9:15 here on Facebook. So you're welcome to join us for that weekly update as well. But in the meantime, we really look forward to seeing you in the last of our final Small Business Back to Basics series next Wednesday here on Facebook at 5:30. A reminder that this live stream will be saved up in Facebook, on our website, on our YouTube channel and elsewhere. It's up on our website and Facebook with a fact sheet attached. It will be up there by tomorrow morning. So if you'd like to come back and have a look at this again, or indeed pull down the fact sheet that is associated with this or any of the other seminar series that we've run either in Small Business Month or before, you can find all of that archived on our website. It's open source. You are more than welcome to watch and download the associated resources. So delighted to be with you this evening. Thank you so much again for joining us, and we will really look forward to seeing you next Wednesday at 5:30. Take care. Bye-bye.